Welcome back to another episode of Excuse My Grandma. It's Kim and my co-host,
Grandma Gail.
It's funny that we do that intro in the same tone every time.
Well, we're getting used to it.
Yeah. So, as I start these episodes, what's new with you?
Well, this weekend, I just went to the most fabulous party last night. It was like, it took me about an hour to look in my closet for a cool outfit because...
Oh, wait, what did you wear?
I'm going to tell you,
Okay.
I looked through everything. Everything looked ridiculous. It didn't look good. But then I said, all right, there's a pretty little off-the-shoulder blue little shirt I had, and I'll wear... navy pants and I looked at my shoes. My shoes were really very pathetic. But I said, you know what? I can't compete with the young girls, so I can't wear these tall shoes. It was a party that I thought was going to be on the beach. It actually wasn't. So I ended up wearing flats.
Well, the house was on the beach, but you're saying like everyone was standing around.
Everybody was standing so long that by the end of the cocktail time, I thought half the people would be on walkers.
Yeah.
Because it was standing constantly drinking.
Well, it's good that you wore flats then.
Yes, wore flats. The outfit was cute.
Some people like take their shoes off at a party after a while.
Well, not this group. This group didn't take their shoes off. Okay. And there were some the guys were actually cooler looking than the women. The women were not particularly terrific.
Even though you said most of the guys were older than the women.
Most of the guys were older naturally, a lot of movers and shakers, but the women were not as pretty. I mean, like you would have been the star if you had shown up there. They weren't that pretty. They were all right, and no cool outfits. No cool outfits. One guy had great green pants on with a diamond chain. I loved his outfit. That was cool. And anyway, we had a great time. We had very interesting conversations. And we ended up having, oh my gosh, it was David Spade entertained and Lionel Richie. And it was terrific. It was a fabulous night.
This is like not every party you go to, right?
This is the only party I've ever gone to like this.
Right. It's like the house, probably like a $100 million house? No.
Probably.
Like something like that.
Probably. But the pool was so fabulous. It was like a pool set on top of a deck with a glass wall. Mm-hmm. And it was just absolutely like out of a James Bond type of movie.
So
It
cool.
was very cool. And very good conversation.
Did he have a good time?
Yeah, he liked it. He had a good time. He met a lot of people that he knows from Florida, so he was psyched out about that. They were trading golf stories.
Crowd.
Well, some Palm Beach people, yep. So he had a good time. And it was a nice celebration, and it really was an experience. And then the funny part is now everybody basically had these Uber drivers or chauffeurs, whatever, dropping them off. So we don't. So the valet, when we got our car at the end of the evening, he opened the back seat. He said,
"Oh my God!"
And for me, I said, "No, I think I better sit in the front with the guy who took me. I don't have a driver." So
that is
everybody,
so crazy.
Everybody laughed. So I think we're the only people who drove ourselves. So
that is so nuts. I mean, do you think part of that is like people are drinking and then?
Oh, I think there were a lot of out of town people that basically didn't have their own cars because the man whose family is originally is from Boston. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of people that had flown in specifically for a party. So anyway, it was great fun, very nice vibes all around. Everybody was happy to celebrate together, it was the most gorgeous night last night.
But no single men for me.
No single men for you. Well, there might have been, but I have
they were 80.
But they were probably close to 80.
Right.
I don't think you want an 80-year-old. What did you do, Kim?
I did a few things. I mean, we're both out here in the Hamptons right now, so I went to my friend's birthday party as well. It was great.
Not with Lionel Richie.
There was no Lionel Richie. But no, it was really nice, and it's a friend that I met down in Palm Beach. But I went to the party and I didn't know any of her friends prior, but they were all super nice, and I was excited to meet them. And I went to this party on my own, which like a lot of the times when you're single is kind of like what happens. Like
it's awkward.
Like if I'm good at talking to people, but I could imagine that it can be awkward, like when you're showing up somewhere alone and like without a +1 and not knowing anyone. And
And it worked out.
No, it totally worked out.
Well, anyway, I think the idea of feeling good about yourself going to a party by yourself is very important, and it sort of leads into our conversation with our guest speaker today.
Yeah, so his name is Case Kenny. He talks all about like changing your mindset, and he posts these great things on Instagram, like on coffee cups and on Post-it notes around Chicago that are really inspiring. And he even has a book called "Single is Your Superpower." It's like a journal. So yeah, like we'll get into that with him for a second. And one thing he does talk about is like having that time in your life where it is important to be single, because he's like, you're never going to look back and regret, you know, being single for a little. You might regret being in a relationship you don't want to be in, but you're never going to regret those single years, or as he says, like the hoe phase, which I'm sure a lot of like people my age listening knows what that is. But maybe for more my grandma's generation, being promiscuous, going out, not worrying about anything except for like, you know, yourself. And do you think that's really necessary to go through, like that phase where you're just kind of connecting with random people and being provocative and getting caught up in the moment?
Well, I sort of think that's sort of college phase. So I would sort of eliminate that phase after you graduate from college. But you know what? Everybody has to find their own timing in life, and if they want to extend that party type of personality into their 20s and even their 30s, that's a very individual thing. But I think sometimes you just have to get over that to get to the next phase. So I think we should now listen to Case and hear his comments and his point of view, because he's got really a lot to say. We are joined by Case Kenny. He's the host of the new Mindset Who Dis podcast, where he shares his thoughts on self-improvement, mindfulness, and how to live your best life, and many other things that we're going to get into. Case, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the basics. How old are you, where you're from, and your current relationship status?
Yeah, so I'm 33. I'm in Chicago. I would say by title, I'm a writer and podcaster. I've been single for a long time, but now I'm currently dating someone. So it's a nice change of pace.
Exciting. So are you exclusive in a relationship with them, or just like figuring things out? Because we're always talking about labels, and like in the 50s and 60s, there was no such thing as like exclusive, but not official. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I would say we're Facebook official.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's a big deal. So I have followed you on social media for ages, and I love your Instagram and how you put those words of encouragement on coffee cups and Post-its. And it's just so like visually pleasing. I want to know how you got started in doing that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I've been writing online forever. I've been doing social media forever. I got into like the self-development space like 4 years ago, just giving my thoughts on things. And I was like, well, you know, in order to succeed, you've got to make some noise. You got to generate a following. You've got to be able to do all these things. And I was like, the world doesn't necessarily need another person who, you know, just writes quotes and puts them digitally online or tweets. Like, that's great. No disrespect to those people. I was like, how can I like do something a little bit more relatable? Like, how can I insert my words in scenarios and contexts that everyday people can relate to? And I was like, what do I do every single day that a lot of other people do every single day? I was like, drink a cup of coffee. I was like, well, here's all this great surface area on a cup where I could just write it. So I just started doing that. Other people have done it for sure. I wasn't the first, but they kind of just took off there. And then I was like, well, I live in a great city. I live in Chicago. I might like try to put quotes out on the street and just in relatable areas. There's something about reading a word in the world versus reading a word on just like a digital surface. So I just started doing that, and they kind of started to take off, and I keep doing it. And I'm that guy always walking around Chicago, taking pictures of things, and it's kind of become my thing.
Very cool. Very cool. A lot of good vibes.
Yes.
Thank you.
So you also have your journals, the new mindset journal, Single is Your Superpower, Unbothered. Tell us about them and the messages that they put out into the world.
Yeah. So journaling, I think, is such a powerful practice. You know, everything I do is I talk about mindfulness, and all mindfulness is self-awareness. And I was like, how do we make self-awareness real in our lives? Because it's one thing to sit down and think about these questions. It's another thing to sit down and write it down.
I like the idea of journaling as an adult because I feel like so many people in their childhood like keep a diary or things like that. Like I was going through mine the other day when I was thinking about this interview, and I was like, okay, what was I writing in my diary at the time? And it's all like Mrs. Smith. I'm not going to say the real name, but it's like Smith, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Smith. Because I was like 12 and I had a crush on a guy. And I was like, this maybe isn't the smartest of all things, but like clearly I was getting my feelings out in some way. So I feel like it's very important to do that as an adult too. And we kind of shouldn't lose mindset of that. But like, what happens when we're in this world now where I feel like we're very into overanalyzing everything and thinking so much about our emotions and talking about it? Is there a way to do it, or how would you suggest people do it in a healthy way and not in a way that's too obsessive?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first thing is like the intention behind it. I have found that a lot of self-help content, a lot of mindfulness content, and a lot of the assumptions about journaling is that when you sit down to journal, you're there to kind of, like, I don't want to say like make yourself sad, but like you're there to like get really deep and vulnerable in like a negative way. Like you're unburdening yourself of negative thoughts. And that's definitely part of journaling, right? If you have a insecurity or anxiety, like that's the greatest way to get it out. But like, I consider mindfulness or journaling in general just a celebration of how you're feeling. Like my whole mission in life, I think, is to like, it's such a cheesy thing to say, but like I want to make mindfulness cool and fun and a celebration. It's why I do these things where I do music, and I do house music and meditations set to each other.
I love the house music idea because it makes it like fun and sexy and like not thinking of like you in your room alone in yoga pants and a cup of tea. And so I think that's a really cool different thing. So when it comes to dating and relationships, because that's really what we talk about on this podcast, how do you create mindfulness when going on a first date and when in a long-term relationship?
Yeah, well, I think if there's any area in life where we know one thing but do another, it's dating. I mean, I can't think of an area of life where we become more blind to ourselves than dating. The human dynamic just messes us up so much. We get so in our head. We want to please. We want to be chosen. We want all these things. So I think of any area, that it is ripe for applying what we know from journaling, for instance. So like, yeah, I think dating is the ultimate objective in dating. I think the reason that I even think I have any advice to offer people, I always think it's funny that I give dating advice. Truly, I think it's the most hilarious thing in the world. Because like, what gives someone the right to give dating advice?
We have no idea. We're giving it all the time, and we can't figure out why we're giving it.
For sure. But eventually you find your reason why. Like, I'm sure like you have found value to add. And I've always just struggled with that. And I probably shouldn't be that way. People tell me all the time to be like, Case, like you are an expert, do it, whatever. And I'm like, I just feel like a normal guy. Anyway, I think like the reason that I feel like my advice is helpful is I look at my life and I look at like my dating life, being in my mid 30s, being single. It's like the reason that I think mindfulness is so applicable is I'm just happily dating. And that's a change from how I used to be in my 20s. And I think the difference has been the application of mindfulness, which all that is self-awareness. So dating honestly with yourself really does solve a lot of your problems, because the ultimate problem we run into in dating is we lie to ourselves, we lie to other people, we become someone we're not, we ignore red flags, we allow ourselves to get into situations that are beneath us. All of which, in my mind, are fixable by being honest with yourself.
You said in your 20s, you were kind of like less sure of what you wanted. Did you ever go to either your parents or your grandparents and ask them for advice? And if so, what did they tell you?
I would never say there was never like a moment where I was like, I need help. You know, I'm kind of a sucker for figuring it out on my own. But I mean, I think like
the opposite.
Yeah, right. And I think sometimes it's best that way. But you know, my parents are all like, it's so funny. Like my parents always gave me the classic advice of, you're so young, like calm down, stop racing, stop comparing. And as anyone would in their 20s or teens or whatever, you would laugh at that because that's a ridiculous thing to be told. Now I'm in my 30s, which I'm still incredibly young, and I find myself telling everyone that. And so it's like I get hundreds of thousands of DMs from people telling me their issues and asking for my perspective, which is amazing. And we'll dive into an issue. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold up. Do you mind if I ask how old you are? And they're like, I'm 24. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Right. So. But when you're in it, you have to take it seriously, because then if you don't, it's like you'll probably never get to that place that you do in your 30s where you 100%. Are now in a like more mature mindset. And two, it's like, if you're not going to treat it seriously, like what are you going to treat seriously? Like you can't. And then I think the reason that maybe like we don't want to listen to our parents or elders when they tell us that is because like no one wants their feelings invalidated. Like you want to feel like what I'm feeling is real, it's important, and we're going to take it seriously. And I kind of like agree with that, but I also agree that you don't have to find your husband or your wife like today in that moment and make that decision in the next hour. Like you can allow yourself the time to breathe and allow yourself the time to like figure it out. Which is why I know you talk about like your hoe phase a lot, like in your podcast. And like, can you describe to my grandma kind of what that phase is? And like you talk about embracing it.
For sure. And one, I totally agree with you there. It's not like realizing that you change a lot and get older isn't an excuse to be like, oh, doesn't matter. What doesn't matter? It's like, you should definitely care, but you shouldn't pressure yourself to, accept things that are beneath you. And that's what I feel like I used to do and find. Hoe phase is what I call your phase just to learn what's real to you. It's your phase to experience everything. In dating, that means you date as many people as possible. You experience as many types of people as possible. It means you ignore what you think is your type and you just experience it. And I think that's so important because what I find a lot of the time, and it's kind of like the danger of the self-help space, is we borrow other people's truths, we borrow other people's standards, we borrow other people's checklists, and that's fine in itself. Like it's good to be inspired by other people. Absolutely. I hope people are inspired by me. I'm sure people are inspired by you, but we need to figure out what's true to us for us. And the only way to do that is through what I call a hoe phase. It doesn't necessarily need to be a phase. It's just a mentality that says, I want to figure things out for myself. Like truly, what am I actually attracted to? Not what I think I'm supposed to be attracted to. Someone who spent the time to go through their phase, they'll realize that their love language is completely different. Maybe their love language isn't on the 5 love languages that are told to exist, so it's just an opportunity to, experience as many people and, attitudes and personalities and values as possible, so you can figure out what's real to you and what just doesn't apply to you, because everyone's different. Like I think it's the funniest thing that we'd expect everyone to have the same expectations and views and perspectives of the world, and it's just not true.
I'm just curious because you are 32 and you've gone out for several years prior to this. At some point when you were in your 20s, didn't you say enough? I need to stop this. Every single girl I'm going out with is lovely, but I keep going on to the next and the next and the next. I mean, if you keep looking around, there's always somebody around the corner that looks better than the one you had yesterday. So I don't know. Sometimes you're giving advice out that that you're looking for something that really is never there. I mean, you could be, that's the thing that I worry about in that kind of thing. You could go on endlessly and never really find one really special person, because there'll always be a fault. Nobody is perfect. So I'm just curious, how you've matured in your 30s. That might have been a different kind of woman than you were dating in your 20s.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because I think about that a lot. And I think about like the potential downside to my content, which is encouraging people to adopt the grass is greener mentality, which I don't think I have. Truthfully, I've done many episodes on this idea of like, what is actually important to you in your life? Like the example, like I have a buddy who's a great guy. He's my age. He's very successful. He was dating a woman for a while and she was great. Like we loved her. She was very pretty. She was successful, all these things. And like, he was like, nah, just like, she's not my type physically. And we were like, man, that is the stopping point. Like some small aspect of her physically, it was like she wasn't athletic enough or something really silly. And like I did many episodes on like, at a certain point you've got to figure out what is important to you, because you're exactly right. You could always find someone who's prettier, wealthier, whatever. And ultimately, like my conclusion was, and it's like my definition of a soulmate was, eventually you decide what is the way that you want to feel. What is the way that your person is going to make you feel, and you make that your North Star.
You also touched on love languages, which Well, I want to hear, like, do you think that you have one, or do you have one that you've created that's like not one of the, is it 5 of them or
I think it's 5. Yeah.
5 or something?
It's 5.
We've never talked
What
about
is
that
a love
before.
language? What is that?
So it's
I
like,
love you.
no. So I hope I described this correctly, but it's like the way that you receive love, or that show it, that you would like love to be received. So for instance, one of them is gift giving, one of them is words of affirmation, one of them is physical touch. So I don't know, do you think one of those like is more?
I think all of them are important.
Yeah.
Love languages are important. I think the honestly, where we get tripped up in relationships is not realizing that when it comes to each individual, they probably give and receive love in different ways.
Right.
And 2, understanding how the other person prefers to give and receive. Like for me, like my love language to receive is words of affirmation. My language to give is gifts. Like I'm a gift giver. Like that's how I express myself a lot. Physical touch, close second. Like that's my MO. And I think where we get tripped up a lot in relationships is we don't like necessarily communicate that. Like
That's
I might be giving a gift, and that's my way. And I think it's very clear that here is Case, I am expressing myself and I am expressing my dedication to you. And she's like, oh, cool gift. But she prefers to receive love via words of affirmation. But that's not mine. And that's where the conflict occurs. So I think I love the conversation of what's your love language. I know it's like the most, at this point, probably like millennial thing to bring up, but it really is powerful.
See, in the old days, we would have taken somebody's hand and held hands, or put their arm around their shoulder, and maybe leaned over and give them a little kiss. So, it wasn't that difficult. It wasn't that difficult. The thing is,
like, there's a lot of people who will do that now, and it means 0.
Yeah. Well, that's just sad. I mean, that's too bad. So that's where because everything is so much over the your telephones, and you're so into texting and not into actual feelings, that's a difficult problem. I mean, and you really need to have a personal feeling of how, just what Case is saying, how your partner wants to be received. If he would rather give a gift and you enjoy the gift, it's perfect. If your boyfriend or girlfriend would rather hold hands and look in each other's eyes, then you have to communicate it. And if you're texting, it's not communicating. You have to get on a phone or in person, say, listen, look at me. I love you. And it has to eventually have some kind of contact. We can't constantly go on with our machines. And that's a very big problem today, and especially with the millennials. Texting, I think it texts a relationship to death.
I agree. I'm team pick up the phone and call.
Yeah.
I mean,
the phone is like good. You hear somebody's voice. And that's a lot to say in hearing somebody's voice and the intonation that they use.
Yeah. It's just like intense to get a phone call when you just start seeing someone.
Oh, maybe.
It's like, what if I don't want to talk for like more than a minute?
Well, then evidently, then you're not into them. Then
maybe
who cares?
It's like, it's new and it's awkward. Like, what if there's a silence?
Well, that's because you're so used to texting. You kids are just on a different, where you forgot how to use a telephone.
Yeah. I see both sides of the argument. I'm definitely a prefer to call kind of guy, but like it is startling if you're not used to it, especially if you just started dating someone. You're like, oh my God, is something wrong? Like, why are you calling me? But that's a total Gen Z millennial thing. I don't know. I think we just got to rip the Band-Aid off as far as the awkwardness goes.
Agreed. Okay. So I want to talk about a few other topics that you discuss on your podcast when it comes to dating. So one you did on how to deal with people when they say you're too cute to be single. I wonder that because like when someone's like, wait, you're single, but you're so pretty or something like that, I don't take that in a nice way.
You should.
Right.
Yeah. So what was your, like, I guess, thesis on that subject?
Yeah, my thesis wasn't particularly earth shattering. I think it was just relatable for people because, to your point, people say that and people hear that a lot. And I know the people saying it don't mean it. They probably mean it as a compliment.
Right.
But the reality is you hear it and you hear it enough. It starts to make you second guess yourself. You're like, wait a minute. Yeah, if I was so great, why am I single? Maybe I'm not so great. And then you start to really beat yourself up. The reality is, like, I talk a lot about being single. I wrote a book called Single is Your Superpower. And the whole idea is like, we can go through all the cliches. Like your relationship status doesn't say anything about you as a person. In a marriage, divorced, single, it's complicated, whatever. It really doesn't say anything about who you are. All I see is like saying you're single literally just means you're single. It means at this point in time, I am single, and that's it. And I've really tried to like help people contextualize being single. Like for me, my whole thesis is that of all the things in life that you might regret, being single, I really don't think it's possible that that's the thing you're going to regret. I think about, particularly in relationships, like think about the things that you regret in relationships. You regret the relationships you stayed in. You regret the toxic relationships you stayed in. You regret the things you put up from partners that you dated. But I don't think it's ever possible to look back and be like, oh man, 30 years ago in my 20s, I regret being single for too long. I don't think you'll ever regret that. And I love talking to older generations because they tend to back up that statement. But I think it's a helpful context. Like, yes, I understand sometimes you don't want to be single and it's frustrating to be single. It's frustrating to be the single friend. It's frustrating to hear those things. But ultimately, if you can kind of, extract yourself from your body, go 10 years forward and look back, you're like, yeah, that's not something I would regret. So I think sometimes that's helpful perspective. At least it's always been for me. And it's different for men and women. Like I totally get it. I can be single into my 40s and no one's going to be like, Case, knock, knock, knock. Like no one's going to say that to me. And that's not even a thought in my head. So like, I totally understand that it's different for men and women. So from social perspective, biological perspective, like I get that. But I think the number one thing we can control is how we view ourselves, the pressure we put on ourselves, the guilt we put on ourselves. And I think when you hear someone say that, oh, you're so pretty, how are you single? You're so talented, how are you single? You're like, I don't know, I'm just single. It is what it is. And then you back into all the great things you're doing when you're single. So that's kind of my take. I'm kind of like at war with people beating themselves up because they're single.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel about people who walk around and they're like, I love being single. I wouldn't want to be in a relationship. Like, do you think that's bullshit?
They lie.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
they're lying.
Yeah. That's a bit of a front that people put on. As much as I'm like team, like be single, of course, there's always a flip side to it. You don't want to be single forever. Yeah. You want to be single for that 1 year and you're like, whoo, and it's great. But after that, yeah, of course it gets old. Of course it gets lonely. Like, yes, you're going to feel lonely. Yes, you're going to feel left out. So absolutely. And I don't think you want to become that person who builds an identity around being single. I don't think that's the best identity to build. Like everything's about balance.
So talk to us a little bit about like main character energy. What is it? How do you get it?
Yeah. So that's a phrase I heard somewhere on the internet. And there's a New York Times article. And it was basically, just like main character energy is just, being the main character in your life, taking charge of your life. Right. And that's all good. Right. It's very blasé, but, I love like idioms like that, like little metaphors for like your life. So I was like, how would I define main character energy? And it's similar, but it's like, it's this idea of being very type A about your life. It's the idea of if you're writing your story, are you writing in other characters or writing out other characters? And these are all just like metaphors for your life, but ultimately it comes down to like, what is your mindset? Are you desperate to be part of someone else's story? Or are you set with who you are, what your values are? You're going to write your story and you're eager for someone to join your story. And I think that it's kind of like it's a mentality shift of one where you're either desperate for someone else to see value in you, or you're open and eager and curious about seeing value in other people.
Mm-hmm. Do you think your grandma the main character of your story?
I think I'm the main character, but I wouldn't. Case is saying it a little differently than I think I would have said it. I think when you're developing yourself, you're also looking to develop someone to come along with you. And I think that was always my story. I didn't want to go by myself into life. I knew my strengths, my weaknesses, and I found a partner who had different strengths and weaknesses. And we blended and had a family. And that was good enough for me. I like that.
But you allowed him in. It's not like he took control and
no, I don't. Well, I think any good relationship, nobody should be in control completely. I think it's a partnership. That to me is the most important thing. And no partnership. I mean, that was the old joke. Your grandfather used to say, well, I'll make all the big decisions. I'll decide who's going to invade Vietnam, and you'll make the decisions on buying a house or on getting the mortgage or going to the market. So it's how you divide up your responsibilities. And if you're both happy with that, being yourself in that relationship.
Yeah, but I don't think I'd like to be told by someone, I'll make all the big decisions and you can make the small ones.
Well, but that was our joke.
Right?
But the decisions were so silly. I mean, there were no decisions to be made. He wasn't going to decide on war and peace in the Middle East or in Asia, and I wasn't going to make the decisions on to buy a house alone. But we used to joke about it because we did divide up responsibilities and we did divide up who was going to do what in certain areas. But it's a different time today, and also you're much older now before you settle down. In the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, people were already into their having grandchildren by the time you're in your late 30s. So you can't generalize. You can't do the times. It doesn't work. The time frame isn't the same. But I do think it's still the same that you have to let somebody in.
100%. I mean, yeah.
You say it's not all about me. It's got to be, yes, it's about, I like this, but I want you to come into my thing and I'm going to respect you and you'll like this too. And I'll like what you like. You don't have to be identical, but you have to have a mutual respect for each other's abilities and talents.
Absolutely. Yeah. The whole thing is like, it's just a big analogy for two main characters. Like the idea is you're a main character, they're a main character, and then you partnership together.
Correct.
It's basically, I talk a lot about this idea of being chosen. Like you deserve someone who chooses you in the same way that you choose them. The idea of main character energy is that you recognize when you're the only one doing the choosing. And when that's the case, that's when you write that person out of your story.
Exactly.
You deserve another main character who chooses you in the same way that you choose them.
Another idiom that you talk about is relation shopping. What is that?
Basically, it's window shopping in relationships. And I think, of course, that's literally what you're doing when you're on a dating app, when you're trying to figure out who you are, what you want in life. That's probably the definition of a hoe phase. But ultimately, I think it comes down to like people who are relation shopping don't have intention behind what they're doing, right? It's like the millennial meme is like, you go to Target and you don't know what you want at Target. You just go there with a vibe and you hope you find something that interests you. But I don't think that's how dating should be. Like, I think you should always have some kind of intention when you go into dating. If that intention is, I want to find my husband or my wife, that's great. If your intention is, I just want to find a hookup buddy, that's okay as well. But both are intentions. I think where we get ourselves into trouble is when we encounter people who are relation shopping who have no intention. They're bored, for one. They don't have anything to do on Friday. So like, yeah, I'll go on a date. And when they get there, they just truly don't know what they want in any sense. And they don't know what they're looking for. And I have nothing against people who are trying to figure out what they want in a partner. That can take a long time. But I think we all deserve, if we've taken the time to figure out what we want, then we should really be stringent about trying to find someone else who's the same.
Well, Case, thank you so much. You were amazing. And we learned so much, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm going to go get one of his journals. I'm going to write something in it.
We're going to start journaling. Tell our listeners where they can follow you and buy your journals.
Well, thank you so much. This is a really cool concept. I've never done anything like this. So it's great meeting you both. And thank you for your respective perspectives. Case.Kenny on Instagram, everything there. And then the podcast is called New Mindset Who Dis. NewMindsetWhoDis.com is where you can pick up the journals.
I hope you guys enjoyed the episode with Case Kenny. He's really a great person to follow on Instagram. So you guys should. And follow us as well at Excuse My Grandma and on TikTok at Excuse My Grandma. Let's talk our 1950s movie of the week.
What do you think, Kim? How about Guys and Dolls?
It was, the Broadway show was 1950. The film was 1955.
I love the film.
Marlon Brando, Frank Sinatra. They're gamblers going through a phase in life, and the song Guys and Dolls in it basically is talking about, like, when a guy suddenly is acting differently or buying jewelry or doing whatever, the only reason they're doing it is for some girl. So it's like getting out of that single hoe phase that we were talking about and moving on to being in a relationship. In the song they say, like,
you don't have to repeat the song. Just tell them
just tell them. Well, it says when a lazy slob takes a good steady job. Like, that
it's a character development, and that's what this guy talks about.
Yeah.
So we're putting it as a stretch. It's a stretch.
You know what? They're all good movies. So
they're all great.
You're welcome. Please like leave us a review, you guys, wherever you're listening, and leave us 5 stars. We want to hear from you guys and keep doing this podcast the way that we're doing it. Our website is excusemygrandma.com. Write in your questions, and we will see you next week.
Bye.